In this video we will follow Ilya from Klubный Servis Moscow as he shares his initial observations and impressions from GWM Tank 300 that has finally landed in Russia and is yet to properly arrive in Australia. As soon as I get a chance to test drive the car myself, please rest assured that another hands-on review is coming, but in the meantime let's hear what Ilya has to say about the car. Translation and adaptation of the original video for English-speaking audience was made by me, Dmitry of Value Cars Australia. All rights to the original content belong to Клубный Сервис channel, and the source video link is provided in the description of this video with my thanks to the original authors. Please always keep in mind that my channel has no political affiliation and I do not tolerate any racist or political statements in the comments to my videos, as all we discuss here are cars, that's it. Any political statements get deleted immediately and their authors get banned without any warning or hesitation. So please do not violate the community guidelines of my channel. Thank you. Great Wall Motor created a new subdivision that is positioned as a luxury SUV brand with the best name ever, try and prove me wrong here, called Tank. Ilya compares this move by GWM to that of Toyota, where they created a luxury spin-off called Lexus that we all know very well about. In Russia, this car right now costs about 51,000 American dollars, or a massive price tag of almost 84,000 of Australian dollars respectively. Well, we know how ridiculously priced foreign manufactured vehicles are in Russia these days for a whole bunch of reasons, so this is more of an FYI note, but we'll hold our breath and wait to see what price is like when Tank 300 properly lands in Australia. And yes, it is fair to assume that it will be about 20,000 cheaper. And you can absolutely go to GWM website right now and play with the pre-order calculator that will show you something relevant to where you live based on your postcode. I'll believe all of this when I see it at the local dealership and talk to my people, but that's a story for another time. While Tank 300 is a GWM sub-brand of its own, mechanically apparently it has a lot from Haval H9, Toyota Prado clone that we do not have here in Australia, but that's been very popular due to lower pricing on the territory of Russia for several years. Tank 300 that Ilya is looking at is a model with a 4-cylinder 2-liter turbo petrol engine and about 220 horsepower, apparently, which is claimed to be enough here power to accelerate and drive reasonably well, as Ilya apparently tested it himself. Design-wise, Ilya points out that with many China-originating brands and individual cars, they usually borrow quite a lot from the other brands, which in this particular case looks like a bit of a new Bronco or maybe some of the latest American Ford models. No, not the Australian bogan-orientated Ute models, of course. From my own perspective, I think the car looks very similar to Jeep Wrangler. Yes, you need to use your imagination a little bit, but as an ex-Wrangler driver and owner of 2 Jeep Wranglers in the recent past, I can see it very much so in this car, and I absolutely am in love with this boxy look. Ilya thinks that if GWM push the design and the interior particularly further towards the unapologetic brutal box of a Mercedes Geländewagen, that is very popular in Russia, and I even see it driven and be quite head-turning around Sydney these days too. If they went even closer to that design, they would probably double their sales of Tank 300. Speaking of Mercedes Geländewagen, the interior apparently reminds Ilya very much of that car. Adapted design, of course, not a direct clone, not a direct copy, but Tank 300 apparently looks and feels very European and specifically German to his eyes, which we will have to, take his word for it for now, not being able for me to touch and feel Tank 300 myself and validate that statement. It's great to hear that someone who is usually quite harsh on China-made cars, Ilya this time around says that the interior design feels actually very well thought through, solidly made and quite functional, which again from my perspective doesn't surprise me too much, as in all honesty I am a rather happy owner of Haval H6, other than some problems with electronics, but as far as how it's made, how it feels inside, it is definitely a very, very impressive piece of hardware. There are multiple ways to control a variety of car features, such as the seat warmers, intelligent drive assist. Ilya, my man, don't get me started there, please, mate. Ilya also mentions here that not all of these features, such as highlights and ambient lighting, work as smoothly and as efficiently as one would like. But it can all be forgiven for an absolutely insane price difference that he mentions between Tank 300 and Toyota Prado, at least in Russia right now. Speaking of combination of different design decisions from multiple other car brands, Ilya believes that GWM borrowed some of even British design ideas to embed, let's say, an analog clock into the middle of the central panel of the car, among the other mechanical buttons that duplicate some of the key functions that are also accessible via the touch screen. So if you don't want to use the touch screen, or your fingers are too cold, whatever, you can use the physical buttons. I also very much like that about my Haval H6. Tank 300 is a classic off-roader built on a solid frame. The car is about 4.8 meters long and about 1.9 meters wide and 1.9 meters tall. So it's a relatively largish car, and Klubный Сервис plans to properly disassemble Tank 300 in their next video that we will most likely translate and take a closer look at again as well, by the way. And Ilya here points out that his personal interest in this process is to see how different this particular model that is being exported to Russia is. How different is it from the numerous Chinese versions of Tank 300 that many of us might have seen already being disassembled by the Chinese channels on YouTube. This will certainly be very interesting to see, even though our Australian Tank 300 version might be yet again different once again, which remains to be seen, of course. The car has several four-wheel driving modes, where there is a selector available here, rotary selector on the panel, that allows to switch between those, and there are even specific isolated physical buttons that allow the driver apparently to block differential of the rear axle or the front axle separately, which, according to Ilya, who certainly spends a lot of time with the cars and he's a mechanic by trade, is a very, very rare kind of and rather generous piece of functionality and flexibility of the vehicle to see in a similar car in 2023. This makes Tank 300, in his opinion, very attractive for anyone with a real true need to go off-road. Yeah, and if we think and apply this thinking to our Australian reality, I don't know, for someone to get through the mud to their farmhouse somewhere in regional Australia. There is apparently a very brightly designed 360-degree camera functionality that impressed even Ilya, and a very high-tech space-age looking gear shifter with a whole bunch of buttons and driving mode switches, which for me, when I look at this video and when I looked on the website of GWM Tank, I thought it's a bit over the top, but apparently Ilya actually likes it quite a lot. This remains to be seen upon closer examination. Overall impression is apparently very, very positive from the interior of the car, according to Ilya's normally rather critical view of these kind of cars. What he points out as the first and rather big negative is that if you are a rather large person, tall person like himself in this case, the placement and the size of this black box that is full of electronics behind the rear view mirror, kind of right up front here in the field of view of the driver, the placement and the size of it actually is rather obscuring of the vision of the driver, who's, because of their taller posture, their taller frame, is apparently right in the middle of their line of sight. So GWM probably needs to decide what to do with that, if they can make it flatter or perhaps move it a little bit so that taller people can actually feel more comfortable in the driver's position of Tank 300. Same thing apparently applies to the driver's cushion, or to the driver's seat cushion, which I mentioned in my recent review of Haval H6 and 10 stupid things about Haval H6, where one of the claims made by the taller and larger people is that the front seats are actually rather small, and people with a larger frame, they feel actually rather uncomfortable in those seats. So it looks like, and confirmed by Ilya here, that Tank 300 possibly reuses almost Haval H6's and maybe even Haval H9's seats. I'm seeing some similar stitching here in the frame periodically that he shows. It looks like the same seat as my Haval H6 Lux has, in all honesty, and it looks like the same complaint would be made by larger frame people about the size of the front seat cushion, yeah, the driver's seat. Maybe you need to keep an eye on that and check for yourself if you are 6'2" or something, 6 foot and above, yeah. Speaking of the space at the back, it looks like Tank 300 has enough of it, considering that a large individual like Ilya, who first adjusted the front seat and then sat behind it, he still looks reasonably comfortable. He had to squeeze in because of how massive he is, but at the same time that certainly looks like there is enough space at the back. It also looks like the boot is very large, as once again Ilya is rather massive. He says he's 150 kilograms roughly in weight, and he seems to fit in. Yeah, and I think that's a much better illustration of the spaciousness of the boot than I could have ever demonstrated to you, my friends, if I tried to sit in there and take a similar shot, which I will just for giggles when the car is finally here in Sydney. Summarizing the first impressions here, mixing Ilya's feedback with my own, the car is a relatively affordable, true four-wheel drive car on a solid frame, relatively comfortable by the looks of it, and rather pleasant to drive in. So let's tune in again as Klubный Servis disassembles Tank 300 fully in their next video, in case their dissection reveals anything truly interesting that can't be seen from the outside, and that our fellow Aussie car channels paid by the local car brands would never tell us about anyway. I hope you have enjoyed this translated video. Give me a like, please, if you did, and if you can't be bothered to comment, as that's the least you can do to tell me that you are interested to learn more about Tank 300 before it properly releases in Australia, and before you have parted with your hard-earned $60,000 or so. I very much thank you for watching, and I'll talk to you in the next video.